now we have only considered zeros in the design of notch filter. The problem with this type of notch filter is that the notch has relatively large bandwidth. This bandwidth, that means the width of the notch will be very large when we only consider two zeros and plan to add the notch or the perfect null at corresponding frequency. Now this means that omega naught will be rejected from the input signal, but other frequency components around the desired null are also attenuated greatly. You can see the frequencies around omega naught will also be attenuated. Now I don't want this. I will have to reduce the bandwidth of this notch simply because I want rejection of only omega naught and not of the surrounding frequencies. Now in such a case, I'll have to go for the magnitude spectrum, which looks something similar to this. So let's say I want one null at omega naught, but this time the bandwidth of the notch will be very small. In that case, magnitude spectrum is almost constant till the time we reach omega naught, and then it suddenly goes down to 0 and then it again comes back. And if you want one more null at omega 1, it goes down at omega 1 and comes back immediately, so that the bandwidth of the notch is very small. So if I want this type of spectrum, it will ensure that only omega naught is eliminated and the adjacent frequencies are not greatly attenuated. So how to do this? How to get a notch with very small bandwidth? To do this, all we have to do is introduce poles in the system function. So suppose that we place a pair of complex conjugate poles. So I'm considering complex conjugate poles P1, 2. I'm considering two poles R e raised to plus minus j omega naught. So at the same frequency omega naught at which we have placed zeros, I'm also placing the poles. Now because of this, what will happen? We know that whenever we place a pole at specific frequency, the magnitude tries to increase. But we also have 0 at the same frequency omega naught. Now when you multiply any value with a 0, the magnitude has to come down to 0. So we will ensure that notch still remains at omega naught, because even when I'm adding poles at omega naught, there are zeros still present at omega naught. But what will be the effect of these poles at omega naught? The effect will be that the surrounding frequencies of omega naught will see very large magnitude, and hence the notch will occur only at omega naught and not at surrounding frequencies. This will reduce the width of the notch and it will give me a more perfect notch filter. Please remember that poles cannot be on the unit circle. They cannot also be outside the unit circle, because that will make system unstable. So that's the reason this R that we have has to be less than 1, so that the poles are inside the unit circle. So if I add these poles, my new transfer function will look something like this. H of z equal to B naught is a constant, will remain as it is. The numerator will not change, so I'll just keep the numerator as it is, because I'm still considering two complex zeros at omega naught. The denominator will become 1 minus, first 0 will be R e raised to j omega naught z inverse into 1 minus R e raised to minus j omega naught z inverse. Now this is exactly similar to what we have considered before. R was equal to 1 in that case, because those were the zeros on the unit circle. And if I simplify the denominator like we did for numerator, we get B naught into 1 minus 2 cos omega naught z inverse plus z raised to minus 2, and this gets divided by, if you expand this and simplify, you will get 1 minus 2. There will be R this time. You will still have cos omega naught z inverse plus you will get R square z raised to minus 2. So you can see numerator and denominator are very much similar, except that numerator does not have R because R is equal to 1, as zeros are placed on the unit circle. So this is my final transfer function of a notch filter, which will have single notch at omega naught, and that notch will have very small bandwidth. If you want to introduce one more notch at omega 1, you will have exactly similar polynomials in the numerator and denominator, this time in the form of omega 1.